The helicopter blades chopped through the Arctic air with a violence that made conversation impossible. I pressed my face against the scratched plexiglass window and watched the last vestiges of civilization disappear beneath us. A mining town reduced to a cluster of rust-colored buildings, then nothing but white. Endless, featureless white, broken only by the occasional ridge of exposed rock jutting through the permafrost like the spine of something long dead. My name is Evan Morales, and at the time I believed I understood what isolation meant. I was 28 years old, recently unemployed after my previous employer, a telecom company in Anchorage, had dissolved in a mess of budget cuts and corporate restructuring. The job posting for Bristow Ridge Weather Station had appeared on a government contract site at 2 in the morning while I was scrolling through my phone, unable to sleep, calculating how many months of rent I had left. 3 months. Solo assignment. Winter maintenance technician. Minimal qualifications required. The pay was almost obscene for what seemed like basic data logging and equipment upkeep. I should have wondered why they were offering so much. The station materialized through the snow squall like a vision from a Cold War fever dream. A collection of prefabricated metal modules connected by enclosed walkways, the whole structure painted in peeling industrial gray that had faded to the color of old bones. 2 radio towers flanked the main building, their guy wires singing in the wind, a sound that carried even over the helicopter's rotor wash. The pilot, a Yupik man named Paul, who'd said maybe 10 words during the 90-minute flight, circled once before setting down on a cleared pad marked by orange cones half buried in snow. The man waiting beside the landing zone didn't wave. He stood with his hood up, hands shoved deep in his parka pockets, his posture suggesting he'd been standing there for hours. As Paul killed the engine and the blades began their slow descent into silence, I grabbed my duffel and climbed out into air so cold it felt like inhaling knives. "Hargreaves," I shouted over the dying rotor noise. He nodded once. Up close, I could see he was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, but he had the look of someone much older. His face was gaunt, shadowed by a beard that had been trimmed recently but without care. His eyes never quite met mine. Instead, they darted past me, scanning the ridgeline to the north where the land rose sharply before dropping away into nothing. "You're late," he said. His voice was hoarse, like he hadn't used it in weeks. "Weather delay in... doesn't matter." He thrust a binder at me, the kind with a heavy-duty vinyl cover, its edges reinforced with metal corners. The label read, "Operational Protocols. Read first. Everything you need is in here. Generator schedule, radio checks, data uplink procedures. Read all of it, tonight." I took the binder, feeling its unexpected weight. "I got the technical specs already. The agency sent..." "Read it anyway." Behind us, Paul was already unloading supply crates from the helicopter's cargo net, working with the efficient silence of someone who wanted to leave as quickly as possible. Hargreaves glanced back at him, then at the station entrance, then at me. His jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. "Follow the rules, all of them. Don't improvise. Don't think you know better. Don't..." He stopped, his breath forming clouds that the wind tore apart. "Just follow them." I tried for a reassuring smile. "Look, I know these remote posts can mess with your head. I've done isolation work before. I'll be fine." Something flickered across his face. Not quite pity, not quite fear. "Sure," he said flatly. "You'll be fine." Paul called out that he was ready. Hargreaves turned without another word, walking toward the helicopter with a stiff gait that suggested either injury or exhaustion. I noticed he didn't look back at the station. Not once. As the helicopter lifted off, the downdraft sending up swirls of loose snow, I raised my hand in farewell. Hargreaves stared straight ahead through the windscreen, his face expressionless, already gone in every way that mattered. The sound of the rotors faded gradually, diminishing into the constant low moan of the wind. And then I was alone. The station's entrance required 3 separate keycards, each controlling a different lock. The first 2 worked smoothly, but the third stuck, and I had to jiggle it twice before the bolt retracted with a heavy clunk. The door itself was steel, easily 3 inches thick, with a rubberized seal that had been repaired multiple times with what looked like industrial adhesive. Odd for a weather station. I filed the observation away and stepped inside. The airlock, because that's what it was, functionally, was cramped and overheated, the temperature contrast so sharp that my glasses immediately fogged. I stripped off my outer layers and hung them on designated hooks, noting the cleanliness of the space. Hargreaves, whatever his issues, had at least maintained basic protocols. Beyond the inner door, the main corridor stretched 30 feet, fluorescent lights humming overhead, branching off into what the floor plan had labeled as quarters, operations, storage, and mechanical. I headed for operations first. The room was exactly what I'd expected. Workstations lined with monitors displaying meteorological data, temperature gradients, wind speeds, barometric pressure readings. Banks of hard drives clicked and whirred, recording data streams from the sensor array outside. A laminated checklist hung beside the main terminal, its edges worn from repeated handling. On the desk sat a logbook, its cover warped from humidity, open to the most recent entry. I flipped back through the pages. Hargreaves' handwriting grew progressively worse over his 3-month tenure, starting with neat technical notations and degrading into tight, cramped scrawls. The last 3 entries simply read, "No incidents. Systems nominal. Remaining compliant." Remaining compliant. Strange phrasing. I signed my name and the date, November 8th, noting that the previous 3 signatures before Hargreaves were either heavily smudged or appeared incomplete, as if the writers had been interrupted mid-stroke. The entry before those was dated 8 months prior. Someone named Chen. That seemed like an unusual gap in coverage for a government monitoring station. I set down the pen and opened the binder Hargreaves had given me. The first section was standard. Generator maintenance schedules, radio protocol, emergency procedures, equipment manuals. But interspersed between the technical documents were pages that clearly didn't belong to any official manual. They were printed on different paper, older, slightly yellowed, and formatted differently. No agency header, no reference numbers. Just bold text and simple numbering. Supplementary operational rules. Rule 1. If you hear knocking on the north wall after midnight, do not respond, do not investigate. Continue your work as normal. The knocking will stop on its own. Rule 2. Do not look directly at the silhouette on the ridge. If you must verify weather conditions to the north, use the cameras. Rule 3. If a person appears in 2 places at once, neither is human. Retreat to operations and lock the interior doors. Rule 4. If someone calls your name from outside, check the security cameras before responding. If you do not see a person on the cameras, do not open the door under any circumstances. Rule 5. Do not leave the station perimeter alone after sundown. If you must go outside after dark, verify your location using GPS every 3 minutes. Rule 6. If the wind begins to sound like voices, ignore what it says. It is only wind. Rule 7. Do not answer questions you don't remember being asked. Rule 8. If you see lights moving on the tundra that are not reflected on the motion sensors, they are not real. Do not follow them. I read through the list twice, waiting for the punchline. It had to be hazing. Some elaborate joke passed down between technicians. A tradition meant to unsettle the newcomers. The Alaskan wilderness had a reputation for driving people toward superstition. The endless darkness of winter, the isolation, the sensory deprivation. I'd read about it during my preparation. Experienced outdoorsmen hallucinating companions, researchers at polar stations developing shared delusions. This was probably the same thing, crystallized into ritual. I closed the binder and laughed, alone in the empty station. The sound swallowed by the hum of electronics and the omnipresent wind outside. It was only later, after I'd unpacked my belongings and heated a ration meal and settled into the narrow bunk in my quarters, that I found myself thinking about Hargreaves' face. The way he'd looked at me, not like someone perpetuating a joke, like someone delivering a warning he knew wouldn't be believed. I fell asleep listening to the wind test the seals on the windows and tried not to think about how it sometimes sounded almost like words. The first 2 days passed in a blur of routine that felt almost meditative. I woke at 6, checked the data uplinks, verified sensor calibrations, logged pressure readings, monitored the automatic weather packages that transmitted every 12 hours to a NOAA facility somewhere in the lower 48. The work was tedious but not difficult, exactly what I'd signed up for. The station's systems were old but well maintained, and the isolation, rather than oppressing me, felt like a relief. No traffic, no crowds, no performance reviews or office politics. Just me, the machines, and the endless white expanse beyond the reinforced windows. The environment itself, though, was stranger than I'd anticipated. Alaska in November is a study in hostility. The sun made brief, grudging appearances, rising late and setting early. The light slanting across the tundra at angles that created shadows too long for the terrain, stretching and distorting until distance lost meaning. The wind was constant but inconsistent, sometimes dying to an eerie stillness, other times accelerating without warning into gusts that made the entire station creak and shudder. Through the operations room windows, I could see the northern ridgeline, a rise of exposed rock and ice about 200 yards from the station, its edge sharp against the sky. I never saw anything move out there, but sometimes I had the uncomfortable sensation of being watched. On the second night, I stayed up late recalibrating a malfunctioning anemometer, the wind speed sensor that had been giving erratic readings since my arrival. The work required accessing diagnostic software, cross-referencing error logs, tedious digital troubleshooting. I'd made coffee, terrible instant stuff from the supply stores, and was halfway through my third cup when I noticed the time, 12:14 a.m. I rubbed my eyes and stretched, my spine popping from too long in the desk chair. The station at night had a different quality than during the day. The heating system's hum seemed louder. The wind sounded closer, more intimate, like it was testing every seam and rivet. I saved my work and stood, planning to do a quick perimeter check before bed, part of the daily protocols. That's when I heard the knock, a single clear impact. Metal on metal, resonant and deliberate. It came from the north wall of the operations room. I froze, my hand still on the back of the chair, my breath suddenly loud in the silence between one gust of wind and the next. The knock didn't repeat. I waited, counting heartbeats, telling myself it was thermal contraction, metal expanding and contracting in the extreme temperature differentials. Buildings made noises, especially old ones subjected to Arctic conditions. Then it came again, 3 times, slow, measured, evenly spaced. Knock, knock, knock. My throat went dry. The north wall was exterior, nothing but tundra and wind beyond it. No catwalks, no maintenance access, no reason for anything to be out there, and even if something were, how would it reach? The operations module was elevated on support pylons 8 feet off the ground. An animal couldn't knock. The sound was patient, almost polite, like someone asking for permission to enter. I thought about Rule 1. If you hear knocking on the north wall after midnight, do not respond. It's a coincidence, I told myself, just a weird coincidence. The rule was written to capitalize on common building noises, to make you paranoid about perfectly normal phenomena. It was psychological manipulation, nothing more. But my legs were already carrying me toward the wall. The operations room stretched about 20 feet across, dominated by the workstations and server racks. The north wall was bare except for a single porthole-style window, its triple-paned glass frosted with condensation. I approached it slowly, my ridiculous heart hammering, annoyed at myself for being affected by what was obviously a prank document. When I was close enough to touch the wall, I raised my hand and, feeling deeply foolish, rapped my knuckles lightly against the metal. Tap, tap. The response was immediate. 3 heavy knocks, precisely mimicking my rhythm, but louder, harder, as if struck with something denser than flesh and bone. A cold sensation rolled down my spine, primitive and undeniable. I stepped back. The wall was silent now, completely silent. Even the wind seemed to have paused, as if the world outside was holding its breath. I counted to 60, then forced myself to move to the security monitors. The station had 6 external cameras providing overlapping coverage of the perimeter. I pulled up the north-facing feed, which covered the operations module's exterior and the ground below it. The image was grainy, the infrared mode casting everything in shades of gray and white, but the view was clear enough. Nothing. No person, no animal, no object that could have produced the sound. Just snow and wind-sculpted drifts and the dark mass of the ridgeline in the distance. I cycled through the other cameras. East side, empty. South, empty. West, empty. I returned to the north feed and watched it for 5 full minutes, waiting for movement, for an explanation. The knocking began again. This time it was rhythmic, almost musical. A pattern. 3 slow knocks, pause, 2 quick ones, pause, 3 slow again. It repeated for what felt like hours, but was probably less than 2 minutes. I stood in the middle of the room, unable to move, unable to think of anything except the absolute certainty that something was on the other side of that wall. Something that knew I was here, that was announcing itself with terrible politeness. Then it stopped. The wind resumed, sudden and violent, rattling the window in its frame. The normal sounds of the station returned, the hum of equipment, the tick of thermal expansion, the mundane symphony of a building in a hostile environment. I checked the monitor again. Still nothing. I went to bed, but I didn't sleep. Every creak, every groan of stressed metal made me tense, waiting for the knocking to resume. It didn't. When gray light finally began seeping through my quarters window, I felt relief so profound it was almost painful. I told myself it had been the wind. Some bizarre acoustic phenomenon, air pressure creating percussion against the building's exterior. The Arctic was full of strange physics. Sound traveled differently in extreme cold. Ice formed in unexpected patterns. There were explanations, rational explanations, and I would find them. But when I went back to the operations room that morning and looked at the binder still sitting on the desk, I didn't laugh. I opened it and read Rule 1 again, and this time the words felt less like a joke and more like testimony. Do not respond. I hadn't opened the door, I hadn't called out. I'd followed the rule even without meaning to, even while telling myself it was ridiculous. And the knocking had stopped. I spent the day running diagnostics, checking seals, examining the exterior through the cameras from every possible angle. I found nothing unusual. No damage, no animal tracks, no evidence of impact on the north wall. By evening, I'd almost convinced myself that I'd imagined the precision of the knocks, that fear and isolation had distorted a simple building noise into something more sinister. Almost. That night, I set an alarm for 11:45 p.m. When it woke me, I went to operations and waited, watching the north wall, the monitor displaying the empty exterior. Midnight came and went. No knocking. I felt foolish and relieved in equal measure. The next night, I didn't bother staying up. I slept soundly, dreamlessly, and woke feeling more like myself. The incident receded in my mind, taking its place among the category of things that were strange but ultimately explainable, requiring no supernatural explanation. I was wrong, of course, but I wouldn't understand how wrong until Bryce arrived. The radio crackled to life on the afternoon of my 6th day at Bristow Ridge, startling me out of a maintenance task involving the replacement of corroded battery terminals in the backup power system. Bristow Ridge, this is Black Point Station. Do you copy? Over. I grabbed the handset, grateful for a human voice that wasn't my own. Black Point, this is Bristow Ridge. I copy. Go ahead. Hey man, this is Bryce Kellerman, contractor out of Black Point. I'm about 20 miles south of your position with engine trouble. Getting a lot of vibration and oil pressure warnings. Think I can limp to your location for assessment? Over. I checked the weather display. Clear for the next 8 hours, winds moderate. Affirmative, Black Point. We've got space. What's your ETA? Hour and a half, maybe 2 if this bird's as sick as she feels. Appreciate it. Out. The prospect of company, even temporary, lifted my spirits more than I wanted to admit. 6 days alone had been manageable, but not exactly pleasant. The silence had weight here, and while I'd grown accustomed to it, I hadn't learned to enjoy it. Bryce arrived just before sunset, his snowmobile sputtering into the station perimeter, trailing blue smoke, clearly on its last legs mechanically. He pulled off his helmet to reveal a broad, friendly face flushed from cold and exertion, maybe 35, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent years working outdoor contracts in harsh climates. Evan, he extended a gloved hand, which I shook. Man, thanks for the refuge. She started making noises about 40 miles back that no machine should make. We can take a look in the morning when there's better light, I said. Come on, let's get you inside. Bryce was everything I wasn't. Loud, confident, radiating the kind of casual competence that comes from a decade of wilderness work. Over dinner, rehydrated chili that tasted like cardboard but filled the stomach. He told me about the string of remote stations he'd serviced over the years. Oil field monitoring posts, seismic arrays, environmental sampling platforms scattered across the emptiest parts of Alaska. This is my first time this far north, though, he admitted, scraping his bowl. Black Point's pretty cushy comparatively. Actual trees, only 70 miles from civilization. He grinned. You drew the short straw with this posting, buddy. It's not so bad, I said, though even to my ears it sounded defensive. Yeah? Bryce stood and began exploring the common area with unself-conscious curiosity. Opening cabinets, examining equipment, picking up the logbook and flipping through it. That's when he found the binder. He pulled it from where I'd left it beside the main terminal and read the label aloud. Operational protocols. Oh man, please tell me they gave you the weird rules thing. My stomach tightened. You've seen them before? Dude, every remote station has some version. It's like a hazing tradition. Last place I was at had rules about not whistling after dark and knocking 3 times before entering the bathroom. He flipped it open, scanning the pages, and burst out laughing. Do not look directly at the silhouette on the ridge. Oh, that's a good one. If the wind begins to sound like voices. Okay, that's actually pretty creative. He looked up at me, still grinning. Please tell me you don't actually follow these. I shrugged, uncomfortable. Some of them are just common sense. Not going out alone after dark in terrain like this. Sure, but if someone calls your name from outside, check the cameras. Come on, they're screwing with you. He tossed the binder back onto the desk. I bet Hargreaves wrote half of these just to watch you jump at shadows. I didn't mention the knocking. It seemed foolish now, with Bryce's skepticism filling the room like light and darkness. Maybe he was right. Maybe I'd been too willing to be spooked, too isolated to maintain perspective. That night we stayed up late. Bryce telling stories from various postings, the conversation comfortable and normal in a way I'd badly needed. Around 11, I began yawning and suggested we call it. "Yeah, I'm pretty beat too," Bryce agreed, stretching. "Where'd you put me?" "Secondary quarters down the hall. Already made up the—" The wind rose suddenly, cutting me off mid-sentence. We both paused, listening. It wasn't unusual. Gusts came and went. But this one had a strange quality, a rising and falling pitch that almost sounded modulated. It grew louder, rattling the windows, and then, unmistakably, it shaped itself into sound. "Evan." My name drawn out, distorted but recognizable. The voice, if it was a voice, seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, carried on the wind but not quite part of it. Bryce's grin faded. "Okay, that's weird." "It's just wind turbulence," I said, but my mouth was dry. "Acoustic effects. The station's shape creates—" "Ivan, help me." "Jesus," Bryce muttered. He stood abruptly and walked toward the airlock entrance. "Is someone actually out there?" "Bryce, wait!" I grabbed the binder, flipping to Rule 4. "If someone calls your name from outside, check the security cameras," but Bryce was already at the inner airlock door, one hand on the release handle. "Hey," he called out. "Someone out there?" "Check the cameras first," I said sharply, pulling up the security feeds on the operations terminal. 6 screens, 6 angles. Perimeter completely empty except for blowing snow. "There's no one," I started. The voice came again, clearer now. "Please, Evan, it's so cold." Bryce looked back at me, his expression caught between concern and curiosity. "Man, if someone's actually stranded out there—" "There's no one on the cameras," I said louder. "Bryce, there's no one out there. Cameras can have blind spots." He turned the handle and I heard the bolt retract. "Bryce, don't—" The moment the door opened a crack, everything stopped. The wind, the voice, everything. Complete and total silence, so abrupt it felt like pressure against the eardrums. Bryce froze, door open 6 inches, showing only darkness beyond, and the faint red glow of the emergency exterior lighting. He stood there for 5 seconds that felt like minutes, his breath visible in the sudden cold air flowing in. Then something hit the door from outside. The impact was massive, slamming the steel with enough force to throw Bryce backward. He stumbled, catching himself against the wall as the door shuddered in its frame, the sound of the collision echoing through the entire station. I lunged forward and grabbed the handle, throwing my weight against it to force the door shut, feeling resistance as if something on the other side was pushing back. For 3 seconds, we struggled, me pulling the door closed, something outside preventing it. Then the resistance vanished and the door slammed shut with a boom that rattled my teeth. I spun the lock wheel, hands shaking, and backed away. Bryce stared at me, his face drained of color. "What the hell was that?" "I don't know." We stood in silence, breathing hard. Then slowly a new sound began. Long, dragging scrapes across the exterior of the door, like claws or antlers or something rigid being drawn deliberately across the steel. The sound moved from top to bottom, methodical and slow, then stopped. I returned to the monitors. Still nothing visible. But the audio feed from the exterior microphone was picking up something. A low, rhythmic breathing that wasn't wind, wasn't mechanical. Just breathing. Close to the microphone. Then it stopped and the wind resumed, normal and impersonal. Bryce didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was subdued. "That was in the rules, wasn't it? What we were supposed to do?" I showed him Rule 4. He read it twice, his jaw working. "Okay," he said quietly. Okay, maybe there's something to them. Environmental hazards or, I don't know, magnetic anomalies, sound distortion. Maybe, I said, not believing it. We didn't sleep well that night. I heard Bryce pacing in the secondary quarters until well past 3. When morning came, gray and cold and mercifully mundane, we examined the exterior door. There were marks, deep scratches in the steel, fresh and unmistakable, running from the top of the door to the bottom in parallel lines. 4 lines, evenly spaced, like fingers. Bryce studied them for a long time. "I'm leaving," he said finally. "The snowmobile's broken. I'll walk if I have to. First light tomorrow, I'm heading south. There's a research camp about 30 miles from here. I can make it in a day." I started to argue, then remembered Rule 5. Do not leave the station perimeter alone after sundown. "Wait until we can radio for pickup," I said. "Another day or 2 at most." But Bryce's fear had curdled into determination. "No, I'm not staying here, whatever that was." He gestured at the scratches. "I'm not waiting around to find out." The next morning, despite my protests, Bryce packed supplies and prepared to leave. He set out at dawn, heading south toward the research camp he'd mentioned, refusing my offer to accompany him. I watched from the operations window as he disappeared over the first rise, a dark figure against the snow, moving with the hurried gait of someone fleeing. That night, the motion sensors triggered. I checked the monitors and felt my blood turn to ice. Bryce was back. He stood in the perimeter about 40 yards from the station entrance, completely motionless. He was facing the building, but even through the grainy infrared camera, something about his posture was wrong. Too straight. Too still. He stood there for 6 hours without moving, without apparent breath clouds, without any of the small, fidgeting movements that humans make unconsciously. At 3 a.m. he began walking, not toward the door, but in a perfect circle around the station, maintaining exact distance. His movements were smooth, synchronized with the gusts of wind as if choreographed. When he passed through the camera zones, his eyes caught the infrared light and reflected it back, glowing amber like an animal's tapetum lucidum. Humans don't have that. At 4 a.m., he stopped in front of the entrance and called my name. "Evan. Evan, please, let me back in. I'm sorry I left. Evan, please." The voice was Bryce's. The inflection was Bryce's. But something about the cadence was wrong. Too rhythmic, like a recording played at slightly the wrong speed. I sat in operations, watching the monitors, the binder open in front of me, reading and rereading rules I no longer thought were jokes. The thing that looked like Bryce stood outside until sunrise, then vanished the moment the first rays of light touched the horizon. He didn't come back that day, but I knew with absolute certainty that I hadn't seen the last of him, or of what was wearing his shape. I didn't leave operations for 16 hours after the thing wearing Bryce's face disappeared. The rational part of my mind, the part trained in engineering protocols and empirical observation, kept trying to construct explanations. Hypothermia-induced delirium causing Bryce to return with altered behavior. Localized magnetic fields affecting the cameras, some undocumented wildlife exhibiting mimicry behavior, combined with my own isolation-induced paranoia creating a gestalt delusion. But the other part, the older part, the part that predated civilization and scientific method, knew exactly what I'd seen. Something wrong. Something that shouldn't exist. Something that had learned my co-worker's shape but didn't quite understand how to wear it. On the 17th hour, hunger and the need for a bathroom forced me to move. I conducted a full security check before leaving operations. All doors locked, all cameras functional, all motion sensors active. The station was empty except for me. The statement should have been comforting. It wasn't. I forced myself to eat, to shower, to perform the mundane rituals of survival. Then I began searching. The station wasn't large, maybe 1,500 square feet of actual living space spread across the connected modules, but it had been occupied for decades and previous inhabitants had left traces. The quarters I'd been assigned contained a small desk with locked drawers. I'd ignored them previously, assuming they contained nothing relevant. Now I searched for the key, finding it after 20 minutes taped to the underside of the bed frame. Inside the bottom drawer, wrapped in a trash bag as if to protect it from moisture, was a journal. The cover was water-stained, its binding cracked. The first page bore a name written in careful capitals, Sarah Chen. Below it a date, September 15th. No year listed. I flipped through the pages, seeing entries that spanned approximately 3 months. The handwriting deteriorating from neat annotations to cramped, desperate scrawls. September 18th, third day, systems nominal, weather patterns normal for season. The previous tech, Morrison, seemed nervous during handoff, barely spoke. Asked me 3 times if I'd read the rules. I assured him I had. He didn't seem reassured. September 29th. Heard the knocking last night, north wall exactly as described in Rule 1. I didn't respond. It lasted 7 minutes. When it stopped, I checked cameras. Nothing there. Morrison wasn't joking. Something is out there. October 8th. Saw it today. The silhouette on the ridge. Didn't mean to look directly. Caught it in peripheral vision while checking the northern sensor array. Tall, impossibly tall, and still. Stood there for 3 hours without moving. When I finally looked away and looked back, it was gone. Rule 2 exists for a reason. October 15th. The wind is talking again. Always my name, always a request for help. I've stopped going near the exterior doors after dark. The cameras show nothing, but I know something is out there. Can feel it watching. I flipped ahead, my hands trembling. October 23rd. Morrison radioed today. Asked if I was managing. I told him everything was fine because what else can I say? That the station is haunted. That the protocols aren't safety guidelines but containment procedures. He sounded relieved when I confirmed I was following the rules. Said he'd lasted 4 months. His record. The longest anyone stayed in 3 years. November 2nd. It got inside. I was in mechanical replacing a fan bearing when I heard footsteps in operations. Clear, distinct boot-on-metal footsteps. I called out, thinking maybe an emergency supply drop had arrived unannounced. No response. The footsteps continued. When I entered operations, the room was empty. The footsteps had moved to quarters. I found myself in quarters. The door was open. I was standing in my own quarters, looking at my bunk. But I was also in the doorway, watching myself stand there. Both of me turned at the same moment and made eye contact. Rule 3. If a person appears in 2 places at once, neither is human. I ran back to operations and locked every interior door. Watched the monitors. Both versions of me stood in quarters for 6 hours, unmoving, staring at each other. Then they walked out of frame simultaneously. I haven't opened the quarters door since. November 4th. Sleeping in operations. Can't go back to quarters. Something is in there. I hear it moving around at night, opening drawers, lying on the bunk. It sounds exactly like me. The next several pages were increasingly disjointed, Chen's observations fragmenting into paranoid speculation and terrified notes. Pressure drops precede every incident. 15-20 millibars in under a minute. Impossible meteorologically. Not animal. Not human. Something that learns, adapts, tests boundaries. It wants in, wants inside. Not just the building, but inside US. The rules are all that's keeping. The final entry was dated November 9th. Extraction tomorrow. I've survived. Barely. To whoever comes next, the rules aren't superstition. They're a map, a survival guide. Something lives out there on the tundra, something old, something that existed before the station was built. It can't come inside unless you let it. unless you break the rules. Every rule you break gives it more access. Don't look at it. Don't respond to it. Don't trust what you see or hear. And if it calls from inside... The entry ended mid-sentence, the pen trailing off the page. I sat there for a long time, reading and rereading Chen's journal. Then I searched the desk more thoroughly and found other items. Polaroid photographs, their colors faded with age. The first showed the ridgeline, a blurry dark shape just barely visible at its crest. The second showed the north wall of operations, frost patterns on the window forming shapes that almost looked like a hand. The third showed a figure standing in the corridor, human-shaped but somehow wrong, its proportions subtly distorted, as if photographed through a warped lens. Beneath the photos was a USB drive. I plugged it into the operations terminal and found weather logs, thousands of entries spanning 12 years. Someone had gone through and flagged specific dates with a tag labeled Incident. I opened the associated files. Each incident log followed the same pattern. Barometric pressure dropping rapidly. Wind speeds increasing to sustained levels that should have been impossible given the regional topography. And sensor malfunctions clustering in the northern array. And with each incident notation, there was a note in the personnel file. Technician departed early, or technician unresponsive, or technician missing. Search suspended. 12 years. 26 technicians. Average stay 47 days. I checked the calendar. I'd been here 8 days. That night, I'd lost track of time, but the chronometer read 2:37 a.m. I forced myself to watch the security feeds systematically, trying to understand what I was dealing with. The cameras showed nothing unusual. Wind-sculpted snow, empty tundra, the ridgeline dark against the marginally lighter sky. Except, on the north camera, if I watched long enough without blinking, I could occasionally see, not movement exactly, a shift, like reality was less solid there, less committed to maintaining a consistent shape. The silhouette from Rule 2, the thing Chen had seen. It was there at the edge of visibility in the spaces between moments. I looked away before the urge to look directly at it became overwhelming. My radio, the long-range emergency band, crackled with static. Odd because it had been silent for days, the atmospheric conditions wrong for transmission. I adjusted the frequency, heard nothing but white noise, and was about to shut it off when a voice emerged from the static. "You're at Bristow Ridge, aren't you?" I grabbed the handset. "Hello? Yes, this is Bristow Ridge Station. Who is this?" "Hargreaves." The voice was distant, breaking up, but unmistakable. "You're Morales, the new tech." "Yes. Yes, I need to talk to you. I need to understand what's..." "Listen carefully. Don't have much time. Atmospheric window closing." The static surged, momentarily drowning him out. "Not hunting you. It imitates, tests, learns. Every interaction gives it more information, more access." "What is it? Where did it come from?" "Doesn't matter. Older than the station, maybe older than the land. Been there longer than we can measure." "The rules, did you read them?" "Yes, but they're not complete. There's more. It gets stronger in winter. Something about the darkness, the cold. By December, it's..." More static. "Inside before you let it." "Hargreaves, I don't understand. How do I..." "If it calls from inside the station, if you hear your own voice when you're not speaking, if you see yourself..." The transmission degraded into white noise, then resolved briefly. "Run. Don't try to fight it. Don't try to understand it. Just run." "Run where?" "There's nowhere to..." "It can't follow beyond the perimeter in daylight. Not yet. Get to..." Static again, longer this time. When his voice returned, it was barely audible. "December. Get out before December." "Hargreaves, Hargreaves, are you..." The radio went dead. I tried every frequency, every channel. Nothing but silence. I sat in the cold glow of the monitors, Chen's journal open in front of me, surrounded by the evidence of decades of terror that had been carefully documented, filed, and ignored by whatever agency administered this station. They knew. They had to know. And they kept sending people anyway, kept offering good pay for 3-month assignments, and kept the data collection running because the mission, whatever it was, mattered more than the personnel. Outside, the wind rose, and I heard it clearly this time, unmistakable. Evan, please, I'm so cold. Why won't you help me?" I checked the cameras. The thing that looked like Bryce was back, standing at the perimeter, its head tilted at an angle no living neck could sustain. "Let me in, Evan. Please, it's me, it's really me." I looked at the binder, at the rules, at Chen's journal. If it calls from inside, run. But it wasn't inside yet. I still had the rules. I still had the doors and the locks and the protocols. I just had to survive until morning. And then the next morning, and the one after that, for 84 more days. The wind laughed with Bryce's voice, and I closed the blast shutters on every window, sealing myself in with the machines and the steady, indifferent recording of data that no one would ever read. 3 days after Hargreaves' fragmented transmission, a storm system moved in from the northwest with a violence that seemed personal. The barometric pressure plummeted. I watched it drop 28 millibars in under an hour, a rate that should have been meteorologically impossible. The wind didn't build gradually, it simply started, going from calm to 70-knot gusts in minutes, carrying snow so thick the cameras showed nothing but white static. I'd prepared as much as possible. Backup generator fueled and tested, interior doors sealed, food and water moved to operation so I wouldn't have to traverse the corridors. The storm was forecast to last 4 days. 4 days sealed inside, unable to see out. Unable to confirm what was or wasn't circling the station in the screaming darkness. Chen's journal had become my Bible. I'd read it so many times I'd memorized passages, looking for details I'd missed, patterns that might reveal something useful. One entry kept returning to my mind. The thing about the rules. They're reactive, not proactive. They tell you how to avoid what's already happening, but they don't tell you how to stop it from happening. It's like someone wrote them while being hunted, creating a map of safe behaviors through trial and error. How many people died to create that list? 18 hours into the storm, the main radio died. Not powered off, dead. The display went dark mid-transmission cycle, and when I tried to restart it, nothing happened. I checked the power supply, the fuses, the connections on. Everything was intact. The radio simply refused to function, as if it had been switched off by some external force. The backup satellite uplink was still operational, but it was receive only, designed to download weather data from NOAA satellites, not transmit. I was effectively cut off, no way to call for early extraction, no way to report the situation. That's when the long-range emergency band, the one Hargreaves had used, crackled to life on its own. At first it was just static, the white noise of electromagnetic chaos. Then slowly it resolved into voice fragments, dozens of them overlapping and interrupting each other. Stayed 46 days before I saw it. Don't let it learn your voice. Morrison here, if anyone receives this. Rule 9, there should be a Rule 9. I grabbed the handset, my pulse hammering. Hello? This is Bristow Ridge. Is anyone receiving? The voices stopped. Silence stretched for 10 seconds. Then Hargreaves' voice emerged, clearer than before. Morales, you're still there. Hargreaves, thank God, I need to know what I'm dealing with. Bryce is gone. Something is outside. I've been reading Chen's journal. Chen survived. His voice was flat, tired. She lasted 86 days, record holder until Morrison beat her at 91. I made it to 74 before I couldn't take it anymore. How long have you been there? 11 days? A long pause. You have time. It's still learning you, still testing. What is it? Wrong question. I heard him take a breath, the sound of someone preparing to explain the inexplicable. Better question, what does it want? It wants in. Inside the station, inside your head, inside you. It can't just take. There are rules older than the ones in the binder, rules about thresholds and permission and invitation. It has to be let in. Every mistake you make, every rule you break, that's permission. That's invitation. But why? What does it do once it's inside? I don't know. No one who lets it inside ever reports back. They either disappear or they... He trailed off. Morrison saw something. Near the end, before he evacuated, he saw what he thought was the previous technician, a guy named Ford who'd vanished 6 months earlier. Ford was standing on the ridge, just standing there for hours. Morrison finally broke Rule 2 and looked directly at him. Said Ford's face was wrong, not injured or frozen, wrong. Like a mask made by someone who'd never seen a human face, only heard descriptions. Outside, something heavy slammed into the station's exterior. The whole structure shuddered. I checked the cameras, but the storm had reduced visibility to 0. "It's testing the walls," Hargreaves said, as if he could see what I was seeing. "That'll happen more now. The storm gives it cover. You won't be able to see what's doing it. How do I stop it?" "You don't. You endure it. You follow the rules, every single one, no exceptions, no improvisation. The rules are a cage, Morales. Not for it, for you. They keep you behaving in ways it can't exploit." Another impact, this time on the roof. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, began walking across the metal panels above operations. Back and forth, a measured pace, like someone searching for a weak point. "There's something else," Hargreaves said. "Something I didn't understand until after I left. The station isn't there for weather data. That's a cover. The real purpose. Someone somewhere wants to study it. The thing outside. They built Bristow Ridge right on top of its territory, like building a research station inside a lion's den. We're not technicians, Morales. We're bait." The footsteps above stopped directly overhead. "Who would do that?" I whispered. "Government, military, does it matter? They've been cycling people through for decades, collecting data on the phenomena, documenting incident patterns. Every log you file, every sensor reading you upload, you're feeding them information about it, and in exchange, they lose a few contractors every year. Acceptable losses." I thought about the personnel files. 26 technicians. Some departed early, some went missing. Some simply stopped responding to radio contact. "Hargreaves," I said slowly, "when you evacuated, did they debrief you? Ask you about what happened?" "Oh, they were very interested. Made me sign NDAs, offered counseling, told me it was classified research into atmospheric psychological effects. Paid me a bonus for completing 74 days. His laugh was bitter. "I took the money and I ran. Moved to Oregon, as far from Alaska as I could get while still staying in the contiguous states." "Then why are you helping me?" Silence on the line, long enough that I thought I'd lost the connection. Then, "Because I can still hear it sometimes, in the wind, in white noise, calling my name. It doesn't forget you, Morales. Even after you leave, even after you're hundreds of miles away, you're still marked, still connected. I help because maybe if enough of us survive, if enough of us understand what's happening, maybe someone will finally shut that station down." The footsteps resumed, moving toward the north end of the roof. "Listen," Hargreaves said urgently. "The rules in the binder are basics, but there are others, unwritten ones I learned the hard way. Want to hear them?" "Yes, God, yes." "First, it can perfectly mimic voices, faces, mannerisms, but it can't mimic knowledge it doesn't have. If something claims to be someone, ask it a question only that person would know. It'll either refuse to answer or get it wrong. Second, mirrors. It has trouble with mirrors. Something about reflection. If you see something in a mirror that isn't there when you look directly, trust the mirror. Third, it's stronger in darkness but not omnipotent. Light doesn't hurt it, but it limits what it can do. Keep the station lit, always. Fourth, the transmission degraded into static. Hargreaves? Hargreaves! Inside before December, repeating, get out before December. His voice was fracturing, distorting. Midwinter, something happens midwinter. It gets... A new voice cut through the static and my blood froze. It was my voice. Evan! My own voice coming through the radio. Evan, are you there? I dropped the handset like it had burned me. The voice continued, patient and conversational. I know you can hear me, Evan. We should talk. I have so many questions, like, why are you still here? Why haven't you run? You know what I am now. You've read Chen's journal. You've talked to Hargreaves. You understand that staying here is suicide, so why stay? I stared at the radio, unable to look away, unable to respond. I think it's because you don't believe you can make it. 84 days. That's a long time to be afraid, isn't it? A long time to maintain perfect vigilance. One mistake, Evan. That's all I need. Just one. And you will make it. Everyone does eventually. The radio clicked off. I sat in the silence, broken only by the storm and the footsteps on the roof, and tried to remember how to breathe. If it calls from inside, run. But it hadn't called from inside, not yet. The radio was a liminal space, neither fully inside nor outside. The voice had come through speakers, through electromagnetic waves from somewhere beyond the walls. Technical, I could rationalize it. A trick of atmospheric interference, my exhausted mind creating patterns and noise. Except I didn't believe that anymore. The footsteps moved to the edge of the roof and stopped. On the monitor, through brief gaps in the blowing snow, I caught glimpses of something on the ridgeline. Multiple somethings. Figures standing in a row, evenly spaced, all facing the station. I counted 14 of them. 14 previous technicians, 14 versions of me, 14 manifestations of the same incomprehensible thing. I closed my eyes and recited the rules, all 8 of them, like a prayer or a spell. Words of protection from a threat I didn't understand, written by people who'd survived just long enough to document the pattern. The storm raged for 4 more days. The footsteps never stopped. Day 17. The storm had finally broken, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt like sensory deprivation. The sun made a brief appearance, a pale disk hanging just above the southern horizon for 3 hours before sliding back into twilight. I used those hours to conduct an exterior inspection via the cameras, documenting damage. The north wall bore new marks, deep parallel scores in the metal, dozens of them layered over each other like tally marks. The roof access panel had been torn partially open, its bolts sheared off, though nothing had entered through the gap. Perhaps it couldn't. Perhaps the rules that governed this thing's interaction with the station included physical limitations as well as behavioral ones. Or perhaps it was simply taking its time. I'd begun talking to myself, narrating my actions as I performed them, if only to hear a voice I could trust. Checking pressure sensors now. Eastern array showing nominal readings. Logging data sequence 774. The sound of my own voice under my own control was a lifeline to sanity. That's why when I heard it coming from somewhere I wasn't, the effect was so utterly devastating. It started in the late afternoon of day 18. I was in operations running diagnostics on the environmental control system when I heard a voice from the corridor. My voice, humming. Not a song I recognized, just an idle melodic meandering. The kind of unconscious noise people make when they're relaxed and alone. I stopped moving, stopped breathing. The humming continued for perhaps 30 seconds, then faded as if whoever was making it had walked away toward quarters. Rule 7. Do not answer questions you don't remember being asked. But there was no rule about this. No rule about hearing yourself in an empty building, moving through spaces you weren't occupying. I pulled up the interior camera feeds. Corridor, empty. Quarters, empty. Mechanical, empty. Every room showing nothing but still air and waiting shadows. Yet I could still hear it faint now, coming from behind the wall that separated operations from the equipment room. Humming in my voice. My melody. I sat completely still until the sound faded entirely, and then I returned to Chen's journal, flipping to the entry I'd read a dozen times. When I heard footsteps and found myself in 2 places at once, I knew Rule 3 wasn't a metaphor. Neither was human. Neither was me. But both looked exactly like me, moved like me. I wonder, if I had spoken to them, would they have sounded like me too? The implications were paralyzing. It wasn't just mimicking me from outside anymore, it was manifesting inside, testing the interior space, learning the environment where I lived. The cage was being invaded by the thing it was designed to contain. That night, though night had lost meaning in the perpetual twilight of late November, I heard it again. Footsteps in the corridor outside operations. Slow, measured, the distinctive pattern of my own gait. I'd locked every interior door, but the footsteps stopped at the operations entrance, and I heard the handle being tested. Gentle pressure, not forced. The handle moved down again, then stopped. A soft knock, 3 times. Evan? My voice from just beyond the door. I think I fell asleep in quarters. What time is it? My mouth was dry. I stared at the door, watching the handle, saying nothing. Evan? Are you in there? I could use some coffee. It's cold as hell in this place. The voice was perfect. Inflection, cadence, the slight rasp I got when I hadn't spoken in a while. If I had been asleep, if I had been disoriented, if I had forgotten where I was for even a moment, I might have opened the door. Come on, man. I know you can hear me. It's me. Rule 3. If a person appears in 2 places at once, neither is human. I was in operations, therefore whoever was in the corridor wasn't me. Wasn't human. The handle stopped moving. The voice changed, dropping the confused casualness, becoming something flatter, more curious. You're learning. Good. But you'll make a mistake eventually. Exhaustion, distraction, desperation. The mind is so fragile. Did you know that sleep deprivation for just 72 hours can cause hallucinations? You're on day 18, Evan. You haven't slept more than 3 hours at a stretch since Bryce left. How much longer can you maintain this? I closed my eyes, forcing myself not to respond. I could help you sleep. If you let me in, I could take watch. You could rest, really rest. Doesn't that sound good? The words were seductive precisely because they were true. I was exhausted to my bones, running on adrenaline and fear, my judgment deteriorating. 3-hour sleep cycles were unsustainable. Eventually, my body would simply shut down, and then what? Would I wake up with the door open? Would I wake up at all? The voice continued, patient and reasonable. The rules are killing you as surely as I would. Maybe more slowly, but just as certainly. You're dying by degrees in here, Evan. Following the rules isn't survival, it's just a slower death. Then it said something that made my hands shake. Bryce learned that. Eventually. Bryce is dead, I said before I could stop myself. A pause, then with terrible gentleness. No, Bryce is right here. Want to talk to him? The voice changed, not in location, still coming from beyond the door, but in character, becoming Bryce's voice. Evan, buddy, you gotta help me. I'm stuck out here. It's so cold. Please, man, I know I screwed up, but please. I grabbed the radio handset not to transmit but to hear static, to hear something that wasn't that pleading, too perfect imitation of a dead man. But the radio was silent. Even the static was gone. "He wants back in," my voice said, replacing Bryce's. Part of him, anyway. The part that's still aware, still suffering. "You could end that suffering, Evan. Just open the door." Rule 4. If someone calls your name from outside, check the security cameras before responding. If you do not see a person, do not open the door under any circumstances. I pulled up the corridor camera. Empty. Nothing but an empty hallway. The door closed. No figure standing beyond it. But I could hear breathing. Could hear the slight shift of weight from foot to foot that people do when standing still. "The cameras don't see me when I don't want them to," the voice said, as if reading my thoughts. "I'm old, Evan. So much older than your machines. I was here before the station, before the weather sensors, before humans even had names for this place. I'll be here long after you're gone, after everyone's gone. The cold doesn't bother me, the darkness doesn't bother me. I am the cold. I am the darkness." I found my voice. "Then why do you need me to open the door?" Silence. Long enough that I thought it had left. Then, rules. Not yours, older ones. Even I have rules, boundaries I can't cross. Thresholds matter. Invitation matters. Your kind discovered that long ago, wrote it into your stories. Vampires needing permission to enter. It's not just myth, Evan, it's architecture. Universal architecture. And you're standing on the inside of a very strong door. "Then you'll never get in?" I said, trying to sound confident. "Oh, I'll get in. You'll make a mistake, or you'll go mad, or you'll simply give up. They all do." Chen lasted 86 days out of sheer stubbornness, but even she was starting to crack. Her journal entries near the end, you've read them, she was losing coherence. Another week and she would have opened the door herself just to end the waiting. The words burrowed into my mind because they were plausible. I'd seen Chen's final entries, the degradation of her handwriting and thoughts. How long until my own mind started fracturing? How long until the isolation and fear became worse than whatever waited beyond the door? Then I heard something that changed everything. A voice from inside the ventilation system, muffled, distant, moving through the ductwork. Bryce's voice, not the thing imitating it, but something that sounded broken and desperate. "Evan, help me. Please, I'm stuck. Can't get out, it's so dark." I stood up, my heart hammering. The vents, the heating and air circulation system that connected every room in the station. I'd checked them days ago, found them empty. But what if... Rule 5. Do not leave the station perimeter alone after sundown. But there was no rule about the vents, no rule about what to do if someone was trapped inside the station's infrastructure. "Evan, please. It hurts. I can't. Please." The voice was coming from the main duct access in operations, a panel held in place by 4 screws. I'd need a screwdriver. 30 seconds of work. If Bryce was somehow alive, trapped, suffering. I grabbed a flashlight and approached the panel, my hands shaking. The ductwork was dark, my flashlight beam showing only corrugated metal receding into shadow. The voice had stopped. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe exhaustion was creating auditory hallucinations. Then I heard it again, closer now. "Evan, help!" And I saw it. A hand, pale and stretched, emerging from the darkness of the duct. The fingers were too long, the joints bending at wrong angles, but it reached toward me with desperate urgency. Behind it, something was pulling itself forward through the narrow space, and I caught a glimpse of a face. Bryce's face, but compressed, distorted, like it had been forced through an opening too small for a human body. "Help me," it said in Bryce's voice. "Please help me." Then from directly behind me, my own voice. Evan, please, I can't find my way back, where am I?" I spun. The door was still closed. The corridor camera still showed empty space, but the voice came again from my left now. "Evan, why aren't you answering? Evan!" Then from my right, "Help me. I'm so scared." Then behind me, "Let us in. Let us in. Let us in." Multiple voices, my voice and Bryce's voice, coming from everywhere and nowhere, overlapping and echoing, surrounding me in a chorus of distress that made it impossible to think. I covered my ears, but the sound wasn't really sound. It was in my head, bypassing my ears entirely, vibrating in my skull like a tuning fork. I grabbed Chen's journal, flipping desperately to her notes about rules. There, in the margin of a page written in red ink, Rule 3, expanded. If a person appears in two places or speaks from multiple locations or manifests impossibly, neither is real. All are manifestations. Do not engage. Do not respond. Do not try to help. It's a test. I slammed the vent panel shut and backed away. The voices stopped instantly. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by my ragged breathing and the hammer of my pulse. I checked the corridor camera. Still empty. I checked the vent. The panel was closed, undisturbed. No hand, no face, nothing. I slumped against the wall, my legs shaking too badly to support my weight. It had almost worked. The moral imperative to help, to rescue, to respond to suffering. It had almost overridden my fear and common sense. Another few seconds and I would have opened that vent, and then... What? What would have happened? I didn't know, and I was grateful for that ignorance. Outside, through the window's blast shutters, I heard a low, rolling sound like distant laughter, carried on wind that had started to rise again. The barometric pressure was dropping. Another storm system forming, and I was still here alone with 66 days remaining on my contract. Unless I broke, unless I ran, unless I opened a door. Day 23, the generator failed at 3:47 a.m. Not the primary, that had been running flawlessly. The backup, the fail-safe, the redundant system designed to kick in automatically if the primary ever went down. I discovered it during a routine inspection, finding the diesel engine seized, its fuel line severed as if cut with shears. The damage impossible to explain through mechanical failure. Sabotage? But by what? By whom? I knew the answer even as I asked the question. The station's electrical system was now running on a single generator with no backup, and that generator, despite my maintenance efforts, was 30 years old, operating in one of the harshest environments on Earth. If it failed, I would have perhaps 1 hour of battery power remaining. 1 hour before the heat died, the lights died, the security cameras died. 1 hour before I was alone in the darkness with whatever had been circling the station for 23 days. I radioed for emergency extraction. The response came 6 hours later. A bored voice from an operations center somewhere in Anchorage. "Bristow Ridge, we copy your request. Earliest available helicopter window is 4 days, weather dependent. Can you maintain until then?" 4 days, 96 hours. I looked at the aging generator chugging away in the mechanical room, its vibrations transmitted through the floor, its exhaust fan rattling, and tried to calculate odds I had no way of computing. "Affirmative," I said, because what else could I say? That night, the generator's output began fluctuating. Nothing critical, but the lights dimmed sporadically, the heaters cycled on and off, and the security monitors flickered. Each fluctuation lasted only seconds, but those seconds felt like free fall. The certainty of technology giving way to the older certainty of darkness and cold. I prepared as much as I could. Flashlights with fresh batteries positioned in every room. The emergency radio fully charged. My outdoor gear laid out for quick dressing. If the generator died completely, if I lost the station's protection, I would have to make a decision. Stay inside in the darkness or run outside into the killing cold. Neither option was survival. Both were just different speeds of dying. Day 25. The generator's fluctuations worsened. Lights now flickered every few minutes, and twice the system dropped offline entirely for 10-second intervals before recovering. During those intervals, the silence was profound. No electronics humming, no heat blowing. Just the building itself creaking and the wind outside testing the walls. During the second blackout, I heard footsteps. Not outside, inside, moving through the corridor with patient, measured steps. My flashlight was in my hand instantly, its beam cutting through the darkness of operations, showing the closed door, the empty room beyond the windows. When the lights surged back on 10 seconds later, the footsteps stopped. But I could hear breathing, slow, steady, coming from just beyond the door. I checked the corridor camera. Empty. "I'm inside now," my voice said from the corridor. "Not fully, not yet. But the lights keep going out, Evan, and every time they do, I get a little closer. Darkness is my territory, light is yours. What happens when you don't have light anymore?" I didn't answer. "The generator's going to fail, not today, probably. Maybe not tomorrow, but soon. And when it does, when those batteries drain and the last light goes out, I'll be waiting. I've been very patient. I can be patient a little longer." Day 27. The generator developed a new sound, a grinding noise deep in its engine block, the unmistakable death rattle of failing bearings. I tore it apart as much as I could, replaced what I could access, but the damage was internal, progressive, terminal. The machine was dying, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The helicopter was still 2 days away. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in operations with every light on, watching the security feeds, listening to the generator's increasingly labored operation. The sound was hypnotic in its irregularity, long periods of stable running interrupted by sudden knocking, grinding, stuttering. Each time it stuttered, the lights dimmed and I tensed, waiting for full failure. At 11:34 p.m. it happened. The generator seized with a tortured metallic scream, and every light in the station went dark. Emergency batteries kicked in immediately, but the backup lighting was minimal. Dim red LEDs in the corridors, a single desk lamp in operations, the security monitors running on reduced brightness. I had 1 hour, maybe 90 minutes if I was lucky. Then nothing. I grabbed the radio. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Bristow Ridge Station. Generator failure, running on emergency power, request immediate extraction, repeat, immediate extraction." Static. Then, with terrible timing, the operations center. "Bristow Ridge, we copy. Weather is marginal, hold position. Helicopter launching at first light, approximately 6 hours. Can you maintain?" 6 hours. I looked at the battery indicator, 1 hour, maybe less. Negative, negative. Emergency power limited to 60 minutes, cannot maintain past. The radio died. Not gradually, it simply cut off mid-transmission, as if someone had pulled the power cord. I checked connections, everything was intact. The radio simply refused to function. I was alone. Through the dimly lit windows, I could see movement. Not clearly, but suggestions of movement. Shapes that might have been wind-blown snow or might have been something else. The exterior cameras were still functioning on battery power, but their feeds were degrading, becoming pixelated, showing strange artifacts. On the north camera, something stood at the edge of visibility. Then the east camera, then the south. Figures, dozens of them, appearing in the gaps between one frame and the next. The pixelation made it impossible to see details, but they were surrounding the station, standing motionless, facing inward, waiting. I thought about running, just putting on every layer I owned, grabbing a flashlight and sprinting into the tundra, but it was -30 outside. 6 hours in that cold, even moving, even dressed. I wouldn't make it. The lights dimmed further. 45 minutes of battery life remaining. That's when I remembered the external floodlights. The station had a perimeter lighting system, powerful halogen floods designed for landing zone illumination during emergency night extractions. They ran on the same battery system as the emergency lights, but they were a massive power draw. Turn them on and I'd drain the batteries in minutes. But Chen's journal. Something she'd written about darkness being its territory, light being ours. And something Hargreaves had said. It's stronger in darkness, but not omnipotent. Light doesn't hurt it, but it limits what it can do. I pulled up the lighting control panel and studied the perimeter. 16 floodlights total, positioned around the station in overlapping cones of coverage. If I could cycle them, on for 10 seconds, off for 10 seconds, creating intervals, I might be able to stretch the battery life while still maintaining light. More importantly, I might be able to see what I was dealing with. I activated the system and set it to pulse. 10 seconds on, 10 seconds off. The exterior erupted into brilliant white light and I saw them. Figures standing at the perimeter caught in the sudden illumination. They looked human. That was the worst part. They looked exactly human, wearing parkas and cold weather gear, their faces visible. I recognized some of them, Bryce, standing with his head tilted at that wrong angle. A woman who might have been Chen, her expression empty. A man in a maintenance suit with a name tag I couldn't quite read. 10 seconds. The lights cut out. In the darkness, I couldn't see them move, but when the lights flared back on, they were closer. Not by much, a few feet, but unmistakably closer, standing in new positions, their faces still turned toward the station. Off. On. Closer still. They were advancing in the darkness, using the gaps between light pulses to cover ground. But they weren't running, weren't rushing. They moved with the same patient, measured approach they'd used for 27 days, testing, always testing. I watched the pattern through several cycles, trying to calculate their rate of advancement, trying to determine when they'd reach the station. 20 cycles? 30? The math was complicated by the fact that they didn't move consistently. Some cycles they advanced several feet, others they barely moved at all, as if even they were constrained by rules I didn't understand. 30 minutes of battery life remaining. The figures were now within 50 yards, close enough that I could see details in the brief light pulses. Their eyes, which reflected the floodlights like animals' eyes, glowing amber. Their movements between pulses which were too smooth, too fluid, lacking the small corrections and adjustments that real humans made navigating uneven ground. They were close enough now that I could hear them during the dark intervals. Not footsteps, the snow was too soft for that. But breathing. Dozens of breaths synchronized in and out, like a single organism with many mouths. 20 minutes of battery life. I realized with cold certainty that the batteries would die before the helicopter arrived. I would be left in complete darkness with these things surrounding the station, pressed against the walls, testing the doors and windows. And I would have no way to know if they were breaching, no way to see them coming, unless I went outside. The thought was insane, suicidal, but it forced itself into my mind and wouldn't leave. The backup generator. If I could fix it, even temporarily, I could restore power. The parts I needed were in the storage shed, an exterior structure connected to the main building by an enclosed walkway. 30 yards. Maybe 2 minutes of exposure. Rule 5. Do not leave the station perimeter alone after sundown. But I was going to die anyway. Stay inside and die in the darkness. Go outside and maybe die, but maybe, possibly, improbably restore power and survive until dawn. The figures were at 30 yards now, clearly visible in the pulsing floods, their faces tilted upward, watching the building, watching me, watching them. 15 minutes of battery life remaining. I made my decision. I dressed in every layer I owned, wrapped my face until only my eyes were visible, and grabbed a high-powered flashlight. The exterior walkway to storage was enclosed, technically still inside, but it would put me at the perimeter, separated from the outside by only a single wall. I unsealed the storage door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely work the lock. The walkway was dark, unheated, my breath immediately frosting in the air. I could see the storage door at the far end, maybe 30 feet away. I started forward, flashlight beam sweeping ahead. Halfway down the walkway, the emergency lights died. Complete darkness, no warning, no flickering, just instant, absolute black. I froze, my flashlight the only source of light, its beam showing only the empty walkway, the storage door ahead. Behind me, I heard the operations door swing shut with a soft click. Its lock engaged automatically. I was sealed in the walkway with 10 minutes of flashlight battery and no way back inside. Through the walkway's narrow windows, I could see the perimeter figures, closer now, almost at the building's edge. They'd stopped advancing. They stood motionless, their glowing eyes fixed on the walkway, fixed on me. I ran. 3 seconds to reach the storage door, 2 seconds to unlock it. Inside, I grabbed the parts I needed, fuel line, wrenches, spare filters, and turned back. The walkway was full of them. They stood shoulder to shoulder, blocking the path back to operations, their faces all turned toward me. Bryce at the front. Behind him, a dozen others, their features unclear in the flashlight beam, all of them breathing in synchronized rhythm. "Evan," Bryce's form said in Bryce's voice, "you came outside." "Rule 5? I'd broken Rule 5. "You made a mistake," another voice said. Chen's voice from one of the figures in the back. "Rule breaking has consequences." I swept the flashlight across them, looking for a gap, a way through. There was none. They filled the walkway completely, and I was trapped in the storage room with nowhere to go. Then I remembered, light doesn't hurt it, but it limits what it can do. I turned off the flashlight. Instant darkness. I couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything except my own panicked breathing. I counted to 3, then turned the flashlight back on. The walkway was empty. I didn't question it, didn't wait. I ran, covering the 30 feet in seconds, slamming into the operations door and pounding on it, forgetting in my panic that I'd locked myself out, that there was no way to open it from outside, that I was trapped. The door opened. I fell through into operations, sprawling on the floor, and the door slammed shut behind me. I rolled over, expecting to see something standing over me, but the room was empty. Emergency lighting flickered weakly, providing just enough illumination to see. 10 minutes to dawn. The helicopter would arrive with first light. I crawled to the mechanical room and, working in near darkness with trembling hands, installed the new fuel line. The generator turned over once, twice, caught and roared to life. Lights flooded the station. Heat began flowing through the vents. The security monitors flickered and stabilized, showing the perimeter in clear dawn light. Empty. Nothing but snow and wind and the distant ridgeline, dark against the brightening sky. I collapsed on the floor, tools scattered around me, and waited for the sound of helicopter rotors that would mean salvation or hallucination. At this point, I wasn't sure I cared which. The helicopter came at 07:23, emerging from the south like a deliverance. I watched it approach through the operations window, unable to quite believe it was real. Half convinced it would dissolve into wind and snow like everything else had. But it landed, solid and loud and undeniable, and a figure in a pilot suit climbed out, waving for me to come. I grabbed my pack, already prepared for days, and moved toward the airlock. My hand on the release, I stopped. Through the window, I could see the pilot waiting beside the helicopter, patient in the rotor wash. Through the cameras, I could see the same scene from different angles. The pilot stood alone, real. Verifiable. I checked anyway. Called out through the intercom. "What's the extraction code?" A random question, but his answer. No code required, just get in. Was natural, annoyed, human. He was real. I opened the door and ran. The cold hit like a wall, but I was dressed for it, had prepared for it. 50 yards to the helicopter. I covered it in under 20 seconds, threw myself into the passenger seat, and the pilot lifted off immediately. No questions, no paperwork, just up and away from Bristow Ridge Station with an urgency that suggested he'd been briefed on the need for haste. As we climbed, I looked back. The station grew smaller, a cluster of metal modules on white tundra, almost invisible against the snow. The ridgeline behind it, dark and jagged. And on that ridge, just barely visible, figures standing in a row, watching. I counted them, 18, 3 more than before. The pilot followed my gaze. See something? I looked at him. He was maybe 50, weathered with the kind of face that had seen everything and been surprised by nothing. But his expression was carefully neutral, his eyes not quite meeting mine. You know about that station, I said. It wasn't a question. I fly the routes, he said after a moment. Bristow Ridge, Black Point, a dozen others. Some are easy postings, some aren't. How many techs have you extracted early? Most of them. He adjusted course slightly, heading south. Record holder made it 91 days, most tap out around 40. You lasted 27, that's not bad. 3 people are dead. 3 people are missing, he corrected. There's a difference legally. I stared at him. You know what's up there. You all know. And you just keep sending people. Not my department, I just fly. But his hands tightened on the controls. For what it's worth, I'm glad you made it out. A lot don't. We flew in silence for 20 minutes, the tundra rolling beneath us, gradually giving way to the first scattered trees, signs of life returning to the landscape. I felt the tension leaving my body in stages, my hands uncramping, my jaw unclenching. I was out. I was safe. Whatever had been circling that station for a month couldn't follow me here. Couldn't reach me in the daylight, in civilization, away from that cursed patch of frozen ground. That's what I told myself. Anchorage appeared on the horizon, the city sprawling and impossibly crowded after a month of absolute solitude. The helicopter landed at a private terminal, and I was met by 2 men in unmarked winter coats who introduced themselves as contractors for the agency that managed Bristow Ridge. They escorted me to an office, offered coffee I couldn't drink because my hands shook too much, and asked questions. Did you maintain the data protocols? Yes. Did you encounter any equipment malfunctions? The backup generator failed. Fuel line was cut. A pause. They exchanged glances. Cut, you mean severed? Yes. Wildlife can sometimes... It wasn't wildlife. Another pause. They made notes. Did you experience any unusual psychological phenomena? Auditory hallucinations, visual distortions, paranoia? I laughed, a sound without humor. Is that what you call it? Psychological phenomena? Isolation can produce severe stress reactions, Mr. Morales. It's well documented. I read Chen's journal, Morrison's logs. I know what's up there. You all know. Why do you keep sending people? The older of the 2 men, gray-haired, bureaucratic, tired, looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. The station monitors atmospheric conditions critical to Arctic climate modeling. The data collected there is irreplaceable. The phenomenon you experienced, is documented but not understood. We're working with multiple research institutions to... You're feeding people to it. I stood up, the chair scraping back. You're putting us in a box with something that kills, and you're calling it research. Mr. Morales, please sit down. How many have died, not missing, dead? How many? He didn't answer. Instead, he slid a document across the desk. A non-disclosure agreement, a liability waiver, and a check. The amount was triple what I'd been promised for the full 3-month stint. You completed 27 days under extremely difficult conditions. You maintained data integrity despite equipment failures and severe psychological stress. The agency appreciates your service. His eyes met mine. Sign the NDA. Take the money. Get counseling if you need it. Try to move on. And if I don't sign? If I go public? With what? A story about hearing voices and seeing things on a remote station where you were alone for a month? Where the next technician will file completely normal reports? He tapped the NDA. This is for your protection as much as ours, Mr. Morales. It allows you to accept that what happened was real, was documented, and is being handled. The alternative is trying to convince people of an impossible story with no evidence. I signed. Took the money. Walked out into Anchorage's ordinary afternoon where people moved through normal lives complaining about traffic and weather and everyday problems that didn't involve entities wearing human faces. That was 6 months ago. I used the money to relocate to Seattle, as far from Alaska as I could get while staying in the continental U.S. I found a job, found an apartment, found a therapist who listened to a carefully edited version of events and prescribed sleep medication that doesn't work. I try to build a normal life, try to convince myself that it's over, that I escaped. But I didn't escape. Not really. Sometimes in white noise, the hiss of shower water, the static between radio stations, the hum of highway traffic, I hear it. My name drawn out and distant calling. I'll be in a crowd and catch a glimpse of my own face in someone else's body, just for a moment gone when I look directly. Bryce's voice on the phone, wrong number, hanging up before I can speak. Chen's face in a passing car. And sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I pull up the NOAA website and check Bristow Ridge's data stream. It's still operational. Still collecting temperature, pressure, wind speed, still being maintained by someone. The logs show a technician signed in 40 days ago. The entries are regular, professional, precisely what I used to file. But there's a quality to them, a mechanical consistency that human error would disrupt. Perfect spelling. Perfect intervals. No personality bleeding through. I want to believe it's just a diligent tech, someone more skeptical than me, more careful, following the rules exactly and surviving where others didn't. But I've read the logs carefully, and there's something in the phrasing and the word choices that feels like echo, like imitation, like something learning to write the way humans write, getting better at it each day. Last week, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line was empty. The body contained a single sentence. The station requires winter maintenance beginning November 1st. Your experience makes you an ideal candidate. Interested? I deleted it. Blocked the sender. But the next day, the same message appeared from a different address, and the day after that, from another. They keep sending people, and something at Bristow Ridge keeps learning. I think about Hargreaves hiding in Oregon, still hearing his name in the wind. About Chen, who survived 86 days and probably hears footsteps in empty hallways. About Morrison and the others who made it out, scattered across the country, marked by something that doesn't forget. And I think about the ones who didn't make it out. Bryce, standing on the ridgeline in the dark. The others who came before, 18 figures lined up like trophies or warnings. Are they dead? Are they aware? Are they suffering? I don't know. What I do know is this. The rules worked. They kept me alive when nothing else would have. They were written by people like me, people who survived long enough to understand the pattern, to map the boundaries of something that exists beyond human comprehension. So I'm writing this down. Call it testimony, call it warning, call it whatever helps you believe. If you're reading this, if you're considering a remote assignment in Alaska, if someone offers you good money for a winter posting at a weather station, read the rules. All of them. Follow them exactly. Don't improvise. Don't assume you know better. Don't trust what you see or hear or feel. And if you break one, even accidentally, even with good reason, understand that you've opened a door, sent an invitation, given permission to something that's been waiting, patient and hungry, for longer than you can imagine. The rules aren't there to trap you. They're the only thing keeping it out. I still have the binder. I keep it in a locked drawer in my apartment, and sometimes I take it out and read through it, reminding myself that I survived, that the rules worked. There are 8 of them officially, but I've added a 9th, written in my own hand on the last page. Rule 9. If you see someone who looks like me, do not let them in. It's not me, it's never me. Because somewhere on a frozen tundra 140 miles from anywhere, something walks through that station. It checks the sensors, it files the reports, it maintains the equipment. It does everything a human technician would do. And it's learning. Every day it's learning. The new technician's name was Marcus Webb, and he arrived at Bristow Ridge Station on November 3rd, exactly 1 year and 1 day after Evan Morales had first stepped off that helicopter into the cold. Marcus was 32, methodical, experienced with remote postings. He'd worked oil field monitoring in Wyoming, seismic stations in Montana, weather observation platforms in the Yukon. 3 months in the Alaskan Arctic didn't intimidate him. He'd read the technical specifications, understood the equipment, prepared appropriately. He was exactly the kind of candidate the agency loved, competent, stable, asking no questions about why the previous 6 technicians had left early. The outgoing tech, a nervous woman named Patricia Herrera who'd somehow lasted 43 days, handed him the binder wordlessly. She wouldn't meet his eyes, wouldn't step back inside the station for the handoff, conducting the entire exchange standing beside the helicopter in the freezing wind. "Read it," she said, her voice raw. "Follow it, don't improvise." Marcus smiled, trying for reassuring. "I've done this before, I know the isolation can—" "You don't know anything." She climbed into the helicopter without another word, and Marcus watched it lift away, feeling his first twinge of unease. He pushed it aside, nerves. Everyone got them. Inside, the station was exactly as described, clean, organized, systems humming efficiently. Someone had maintained it well despite the early departures. He went through the initial protocols, checking equipment, logging his arrival, setting up his quarters. Everything was in order. On the desk in operations, he found the binder. Operational protocols. Read first. He flipped it open, scanning technical procedures he already knew, maintenance schedules that matched his briefing. Then he reached the section that made him stop. Supplementary operational rules. 8 rules, each one stranger than the last. Knocking on walls, silhouettes on ridges, voices in the wind. He read through them twice, waiting for the punchline, the reveal that this was some elaborate hazing ritual. At the bottom of the page, someone had added a 9th rule in different handwriting. Fresher ink, shakier letters. Rule 9. If you see someone who looks like me, do not let them in. It's not me, it's never me, no name. No signature, just that single sentence underlined twice. Marcus closed the binder and laughed, alone in the silent station. Right. Don't let in the doppelganger, got it. He spent the first day familiarizing himself with the equipment, conducting routine maintenance, settling into the rhythm of the work. It was exactly what he'd expected, tedious but not difficult. The isolation was profound, but he'd anticipated that. He had books, downloaded movies, a satellite internet connection for emails. 3 months would pass quickly. That night he made dinner, watched the sun make its brief grudging appearance before sliding back toward darkness, and tried not to think about how the horizon never quite looked the same twice. tried not to notice how the wind seemed to change direction without transition, or how the ridgeline to the north cast shadows too long for the angle of light. At 11:47 p.m., while he was logging the day's data, he heard a sound that made him pause. A knock, single, clear, resonant, from the north wall. He checked the time, 11:47. Not midnight. The rule said after midnight. He had 13 minutes before the rule would even apply, and besides, it was probably just thermal contraction, metal expanding, and knock, knock, knock. Slow, measured, patient. Marcus stood up, the binder's words suddenly very present in his mind. If you hear knocking on the north wall after midnight, do not respond. But it wasn't midnight yet. That meant the rule didn't apply. That meant he could check, could confirm it was just building noises before he wasted 3 months jumping at shadows. He walked toward the north wall, his heart beating faster despite his rational certainty. Just metal, just wind, just... The chronometer on the wall clicked over, 000, midnight, and the knocking stopped. Perfect silence. Marcus stood in the empty operations room, his hand half extended toward the wall, and felt something cold slide down his spine, the timing, the precision. As if whatever was out there had been waiting for the rule to activate before ceasing, before demonstrating that it understood exactly what the rules were. He backed away from the wall and returned to the desk, opened the binder, read Rule 1 again. Do not respond. He hadn't responded. He'd simply walked toward the wall. That wasn't responding, not really. He'd followed the rule. Mostly. Marcus spent the rest of the night telling himself that coincidence and confirmation bias were distorting natural phenomena. He had a degree in meteorology, understood psychology, knew how isolation affected perception. He would not succumb to the superstition that had apparently infected previous technicians. He would be rational, careful, professional. He would follow the rules, yes, they seemed harmless enough, but only as a precaution, not because he believed in whatever paranoid mythology had built up around this station. On the second night, something called his name from outside. Marcus Webb. Can you help me? He checked the cameras first. Rule 4, he remembered, and saw nothing. Nothing but snow and darkness and the distant ridge. The voice continued, pleading, desperate, using words only someone who knew him would know, referencing things from his past, his childhood, his private fears. He did not open the door. On the third night, he saw the silhouette on the ridge. Rule 2, don't look directly. But he did look, unable to stop himself, and watched it stand there for 6 hours, impossibly still, impossibly tall. When he finally looked away, his eyes burning from the refusal to blink, and looked back, it was gone. But he could still feel it watching. On the fourth night, Marcus Webb sat in operations, the binder open in front of him, and understood with absolute clarity that the rules were not superstition. They were documentation, evidence. A survival guide written in the blood and terror of everyone who'd come before. He had 87 days remaining, and outside, in the darkness beyond the camera's range, on the ridgeline and in the wind and standing at the perimeter just out of sight, something was learning. Learning his voice, his face, his patterns. Waiting for the mistake he would inevitably make, because they all made mistakes eventually. The station logged his data transmissions with perfect regularity over the following weeks. Temperature, pressure, wind speed, all nominal, all exactly as they should be. But back in Anchorage, in an office where extraction requests were processed, a supervisor named Riley made a note in Marcus Webb's file after 31 days. Last verbal contact, day 28. Subject responsive but monosyllabic. Possible stress indicators, continue monitoring. Extraction if requested. The request never came. Day 40. Data transmissions continue. Voice contact attempted. No response. Maybe equipment malfunction. Helicopter check scheduled, weather permitting. Day 52. Helicopter visual inspection conducted. Subject observed through window in operations. Appeared functional. Did not respond to radio hails. Pilot reported wrong feel to subject's movements. Recommend early extraction. Day 67. Subject continues data transmissions with perfect regularity. No verbal contact in 39 days. Administrator notes this is longest uninterrupted transmission period in station history. Consider commendation upon completion of assignment. Day 89. Extraction helicopter scheduled. Subject has not requested early departure. Performance exemplary. Day 90. Helicopter arrived for routine rotation. Found subject standing in operations facing north. Subject did not respond to pilot entry. Pilot reported subject's eyes were wrong, reflective in the light, amber-colored. Subject did not blink during entire encounter. Pilot retreated without completing extraction. Emergency protocol initiated. Day 91, station locked down remotely, data transmissions continuing. Someone is still filing reports. Someone is still maintaining equipment. But Marcus Webb stopped responding to his name 70 days ago. Preparing deployment of next technician. Agency requires continuity of data collection. Position posted. And somewhere, in a small apartment in Seattle, Evan Morales opened his laptop and saw the email. The station requires immediate maintenance due to personnel transition. Emergency contract, 4 weeks maximum, triple standard pay. Your experience at Bristow Ridge makes you uniquely qualified. Report November 15th. He stared at the screen for a long time. Then he began to pack. Not because he wanted to go back, not because the money mattered, but because he understood something the agency didn't. Something that all the survivors eventually learned. It wasn't finished with them. It would never be finished, and the only way to survive wasn't to run from Bristow Ridge. It was to understand the rules completely, to document them, to add to them, to build the map that might someday somehow help someone break the cycle, or at least survive one more day. Evan opened his drawer and pulled out the binder he'd kept, the one he'd carried out of that frozen hell. He turned to the last page where he'd written Rule 9, and beneath it he added, Rule 10. If the agency sends you back, go. Someone needs to remember. Someone needs to keep adding to this list. Someone needs to survive long enough to understand what it really wants, and maybe eventually how to stop it. The cursor blinked on his screen. The email waited for his response. Outside his window, rain fell on Seattle streets, and in that rain, in that white noise, he heard it. Ivan. Calling him home. Calling him back to the ridge where something old and patient and hungry stood in the darkness, learning. Always learning. He typed his response, acknowledged, I'll be there, and hit send, because the rules demanded it. And the rules in the end were all that anyone had.